Thanks, Jules, and yeah, thanks to all the panel members there. It's great to get the perspectives from the practitioners. Really important for us today, as I highlighted earlier. Just one point I wanted to pick up on that before we move into the next panel, because we've talked quite a lot about some of the support that's been put in place by WADA, and there's one of the comments earlier in the discussion that Paul was talking about some of the measures that we developed. Just to highlight that WADA are also funding some further research that I'm involved with, that's led by Nikos Toumanis, that is developing very short, concise measures. So we've developed some already in English, and now we're translating them into other languages so that practitioners have those available for the monitoring and evaluation. So yeah, just to highlight some of the support that's going to be in place. If anyone wants to know more about them or to see the research publication that links to that, then yeah, they can drop me a line afterwards. So yeah, thanks to Jules, and thanks to the panel. That was really good to hear. And I think one of the later comments there from Tammy in terms of this being about a journey, and we've collected, organisations have collected a lot of data, and now they can dive deeper. Very much leads us nicely onto our final panel discussion, which is very much around the sort of changes to the ISE and also responses to some of those comments from the previous panel. So for this panel, I welcome back Tony Cunningham and Karri Dawson, who presented earlier, but also welcome Aditya Kumar, who is Head of Education at the ARU. So we've had introductions for Tony and for Karri earlier, but just to briefly introduce Aditya as well. So he's the Head of Education, as I say, at the ARU, which is an independent body established by the World Athletics to manage all integrity-related matters in the sport of athletics. Since joining the ARU, Aditya has led the development and implementation of global education strategies aimed at promoting clean sport and ethical conduct among athletes, coaches, and support personnel. So very well placed, obviously, to comment today, but also importantly is that he serves as a member of the WADA Education Committee, but is also a member of the drafting team that obviously helped with the sort of redrafting of the ISE and 2027 that we're going to discuss now. So just in terms of, I'm going to pose a series of questions, but I think first of all, we'll start with some reflections and key takeaways from our final panel. Firstly, in terms of the research presentation, so the presentations that were given by the research team earlier, but also then that practitioner session. So if each of you could sort of reflect on those. So I'll probably come to Adi first, seeing as Adi's just joining us for the first time today. So in terms of sort of some of those key reflections maybe from that previous panel or the research presentations.
Thanks, Ian. Unfortunately, I've just joined now, so I have not been able to listen to the other presentations that were made. I'm kind of away and in a different time zone right now, so I will just listen into what my colleagues Karri and Tony have to mention, but I will chip in with reflections from the drafting team and the process and those questions over there.
Yeah, sorry about that, Adi. Yeah, so maybe I'll come to Karri for that one then, sure. In terms of reflections on some of the earlier presentations and the panel discussion.
Sure, happy to chat about that, Ian. I think everything we've heard today has been great. It's been spot on. It's super consistent with everything that we heard through the formal comment process, through the consultation process. I think the panel that we just heard from the practitioners was really reaffirming, I guess, as a drafting team member, to hear that, you know, the things that we're putting out there, the things that we're changing, people are picking those up, people are excited about them, there's general support for them. Obviously, there is still, you know, a level of uncertainty in terms of how do we bring the entire global community along to achieve all the things that will be laid out in the 2027 ISE. But I think that in general, you know, we're hearing a lot about collaboration, we're hearing a lot about the strength of our community and the willingness to help and the desire to, you know, to evolve and to move forward. So I think we're in a really good place. And I think the comments were very valid, very consistent with what the community in general shared with us as a drafting team.
Thanks, Karri. And Tony, any reflections from yourself?
Lots of reflections, so I'll try and put some shape to them. But my first thought on the last panel is really what an amazing community we have, and the positivity, the willingness to be constructive and positive, and that came through in the comments, and I think it came through in your research as well. And it's interesting as well is that we're part of the research that you're doing is about looking at the impact of the ISE since it was introduced in 2021, and looking back what's changed since 2017. So, and we're straight into now what's the next thing, and I think that's very positive as well, is that everyone is looking to progress. But I think it's also, and maybe it touches upon, or circling back to maybe what Amanda was talking about earlier as well, is how far we've come in, say, about 10 years. Because like 10 years ago, it's 2015, Karri and her team hosted the first Global Education Conference in Ottawa with the CCS, which was amazing. There was no international standard then, and that was part of what we were hearing, is that the international standard wasn't possible because education is different. How do you standardize education? Really, first, how do you standardize education? Because it's so heterogeneous across the world. And I think the biggest takeaway that I've seen is, first of all, coming from there, it has worked. It has been a community-driven standard where the education community has said, we can do this, we deserve a seat at the table as well. And I think that acknowledgement should be the first thing, because my first also reaction is to address some of the concerns that were raised in the panel there as well. But when we developed the international standard, there was kind of a joke at the time, is that when you put it out and you essentially outsource the drafting of this, and get input from the community, is that when you say a camel is a racehorse that's designed by a committee, and it's not exactly where you want to be. And when we started this process for 2027, we kind of said, well, now we can do our racehorse. But I actually kind of like our camel at the minute, because it is a way of getting you where you need to be. And all of the things that we said were going to be difficult is, how are we going to make sure that all athletes are educated? How are we going to bring in monitoring and evaluation? These, of course, have been challenging, and the community have embraced them, and that's great to see. And Tammy's last point, I think, is also important, is that standard is about getting us on the board. And now we're looking at, well, how do we improve this? How do we move on? Amanda's always making the analogies that we get the base camp, is how do we now get to the summit? And there's some organizations that I think are willing and are looking up at that, because it's always important to remember that the standard is the minimum that's required. So that shouldn't be a target. That is the baseline of where we're looking to get to. And what's amazing, again, about our community is the willingness to help. That came through in the CCQ reviews, came through in your research, and it just came through in the panel discussion there now. Tammy and Paul putting their email addresses in the chat, so everyone should email them and look for as much help as they can. But I think that's indicative of where our community is at, and that's, I think it's a really proud thing to be part of that community and to see that. So maybe I'll draw a line there before we now start looking at the next phase and maybe some other reflections that come up in the group, like about the educators or the education pool or the research side of things as well.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, really useful reflections there. And I think both in terms of what you said, and also some of Karri's reflections highlight collaboration. And I think that's something that's been important, that's come through in all of the sessions today, I think. And that reminds me of one of the sort of key findings that came through the work with the 6 organisations in Work Package 2, is that the consistency in language and understanding of what a term means that comes through within the ISE has really helped through that collaboration, because people are talking about the same things when they're collaborating with other organisations, when they're discussing education with other organisations. So I think that's been a real benefit that's come from the ISE. So if we move on to one or two of our other questions, I think I'll come back to Adi now, and hopefully I've selected a better, more appropriate question for you this time, Adi. So sorry about that, but yeah. So in terms of in your role as the education manager for an international federation, what are the potential benefits that you see of the changes around event-specific education that are coming through?
Thanks, Ian. No questions are bad questions. I just didn't want to shoot in the dark of what my colleagues, although I would have anticipated what they would have said, and I completely agree with Tony that we are blessed with a very vibrant and very strong community and very invested community, and that was very reflected in the kind of comments that we received as a drafting team to review, and like we could brainstorm in personal capacity with individuals, groups, and stuff throughout the process. So I agree with Tony there again that it is the standard of the community, developed by the community and for the community. So I'm not defining democracy here, but it's kind of truly, it's been that kind of a process, and it was a really, really enjoyable, very consultative process for us. Coming to this question of event-specific education, from personal reflection point of view, when I took over the job at Athletics Integrity Unit and by extension at World Athletics, we got these standards about you need to conduct event-specific education, and thinking as an international federation, your interactions with athletes at a time when they are super focused on the biggest moments in their life doesn't really create the most conducive environment for education. Yes, awareness creation, some conversation can happen. And that's where we have taken this in this step, that we have very clearly defined what do we mean by event-specific education. And a lot of that is in the lead up to the education. So we believe from international federation point of view that by the time the athletes arrive to those major events and world championships and those top-level international events, they should be fully educated. And the same applies to athlete support personnel. So that's why this distinction was created with pre-event education. And then there is also opportunity for doing something at the event. So that is, it was event-specific education was divided into pre-event education and event-based education. So there is very clear definition of these two. We didn't mean that people should use every event on their calendar for education purposes. That it says that, okay, fine, education should be conducted at events where testing takes place. This is just an indicator of the value of the event. Testing alongside education is also one of the prevention key tools of prevention. But that's where it kind of refers back to signatories' annual education plan. Then you see that which of these events are best suited for me, which would give me best return on my investment of time, energy, resources. And that's how they should be planning. So I feel that we have given that clarity, but if there is something missing in that clarity, we are willing to receive feedback from the community, and we will provide those details in the guidelines and other supporting documents and stuff that will be produced. So I feel from an IF perspective, I'm speaking individually here, it will create more clarity, more clear distinction of roles and responsibilities as well when it comes to event-specific education.
Thanks, Adi. Yeah, I think that's a great example of, I mentioned just now about the consistency in language and that understanding. So through this collaborative process, Wada have been able to identify where there's further clarity needed. I think what you've articulated there in terms of that distinction between pre-event and event-based is a great example of that. In terms of sort of developing that, the ISE, I wonder if I move to Karri now as chair of the ISE Drafting Team, in terms of speaking to the challenge of ensuring alignment with the principles that you're trying to put in place and trying to communicate those through a policy document, and some of the challenges and how you've overcome those.
Sure. Yeah, a big smile. We had a lot of fun, and we all still talk to each other. So that is a really good sign in terms of the process that we undertook to get to where we are. I was fortunate to be part of the 2021 drafting team as well, and now chairing the 2027 drafting team. So I've got a lot of experience in terms of our dynamics and how we've tried to take the principles and put them into a policy document. So obviously, the principles are usually broader, they're idealistic, they're big, and the policy document needs to be specific and it needs to be really practical. So anyone who was around in 2021 would recall that we used a theme of coloring outside the lines when we presented the first version of the ISE, because as much as Tony said, there was a challenge in terms of standardizing education. We absolutely did that, but we didn't want to lose the creativity of this wonderful community and the ability for them to, to meet all of the requirements, but to also go beyond. So not to just fall into that compliance mindset. So I have to say that this might have created some additional conversations with our friends in legal to make sure that the policy would be able to, that they would be able to follow compliance and all of the, the regulatory and the legal elements that a policy lends itself towards. And of course, the other thing we had, I think, a challenge as the team was the limitation of words. We only had so many words on so many pages. We did increase it by 50% this time, so we took a little more luxury in terms of the number of words we used, but wanting to make sure that what we intended was actually what the community was interpreting when they read those words in the policy. So that's why the consultation has been so important, and all those conversations that we've had to make sure that the interpretation of what our intention was, that was underpinned by our principles, was actually coming through to the community, so that people could use the policy as the basis to, to standardize what it is we're all doing, but to also leave us enough space to achieve our principles and to really be creative as we do it, because that, I think, is one of our strongest attributes of the community that we're a part of.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Karri. That's really helps sort of clarify that. It must be an incredible challenge, and yeah, taking a little bit more space in the words, I think it's probably it's definitely been worthwhile, hasn't it? I think that helps, that sort of transferring more information in there, I think will benefit the understanding of stakeholders. But I think highlighting that consultation process, the stakeholder consultation throughout, is ensuring that that's the case when we get to that end point where we're getting towards now, which is great to see. So in terms of, so if I move now to maybe Tony's best to sort of answer this initially, but in terms of support needs and implementation challenges, what plans are there in place for practical tools, training, guidance to assist implementation? So maybe reflecting on some of the comments from the practitioner panel in terms of the challenges they face. What support's going to be in place for practitioners?
Well, the good news is there'll be lots of support in place. And this speaks to what is dual role here. Like we're straddling two things. One is that we have to regulate the policy framework that's put out, the code and the international standards. But there's also a recognition that we want people to meet these standards, that we want them to support that. And Amanda touched on earlier around what was developed in the last cycle, which is the Code Implementation Support Program, which was developed from scratch led by the education team. And now, as you see, is that we have two aspects to this, what's called CISP. One is a CISP with a small I, which is helping people transition with the updates, whether it's new rules, whether it's adapting to the new requirements that are there. And then there's CISP with a big I, which is all of the other things that is ongoing, because you're never stopping implementing the code or the standards, because programs are dynamic and it's ongoing. And there's lots of resources, whether it's templates, the guidelines, pro formas, there's worksheets, webinars, that is all there in Adele. And one of the things that we discovered from the CCQ is that maybe people were either aware to a certain degree that the resources are there, but maybe weren't engaging with them in the way that, or maybe didn't appreciate how they can help implement their program. So definitely one of the things that will be developed this time, and Jen in our department is helping coordinate this, is around making the resources a bit more user-friendly or accessible, because we have developed a lot of resources and tools now that are there. But one of the things I will say is that it is education, and it is something that you have to put your own flavor to it. You have to, as Karri said, color outside the lines. And we have put in place a framework by which you would follow, which is the process of developing a plan. You monitor that plan, the implementation of it, and you evaluate it. But pretty much within that, it's up to you to decide what is your context, what is most appropriate, who are the most important athletes to focus on, and how you deliver that. And I think a lot of, as you saw from the comments, a lot of people are saying, can you give us more guidance and all of that? And I think it's important to realize as well is that we can only go so far because we acknowledge as well that people in running a program in a country or within a sport are the experts in that culture. So we can't do everything for everyone, but the resources are there to acknowledge that some people do need help with that. And probably my favorite example is I remember in Jamaica a number of years ago, they did a reggae contest related to delivering education and stuff like that. Now, that's not something that would go well in Ireland, where I'm from. It would be interesting to see, but it shows that is exactly where the color comes from, is about people adapting things. And we've seen really good examples, say in New Zealand, about adapting to the Maori side of things with the values in Southern Africa, with Ubuntu values that are there. So that's fantastic to see. So it's about using the resources that are there as a step up. And I think the difference as well this time, as you saw in the last panel, is that